Hi, everybody. This is Silver Spook / Christian Miller.
Hi, I'm Maciek, also known as Fitz.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the simulation hypothesis.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, like Nick Bostrom, to tie this into the retro gaming, Conway's Game of Life, which is one of the first cellular automata. It's basically like a computer simulation where you come up with these 4 rules for little blocks that look like little Tetris blocks on a grid, and it's just like 4 basic rules. Like if there's 2 neighbors next to each other on this grid, the blocks reproduce. So that's like, it's to simulate the rule of reproduction. If there's 3 neighbors, there's stasis. If there's 4 neighbors, one of them dies. If there's one single block by itself, it dies of isolation. There's like basically these 4 simple rules, right? Kind of like how, there's reproduction, there's death, there's eating of other organisms, and based on those 4 basic rules, and this basically it's just a 2D grid like Tetris of blocks. All these you put those, you just drop these little. You can look it up later. You drop random little squares on this 2D grid, and using basic Apple II level technology. It generates these complex, almost living, like you have creatures that move, or like little objects that move, little objects that create copies of themselves, little objects that eat other objects, but they're just little squares, little pixels, like 10 pixel things. You have things that fly and look like they're crawling, and it's called Conway's Game of Life. And this is a 2D simulation to see if life could evolve within a computer simulation based on simple rules. And it, of course, you can't say that it's alive or not because you can't get in there and talk to it. But I mean, so I made this video called The God Programmer, where it was like, so okay, what if the whole entire universe is just a 3D version of The Sims, right? Or 3D version of this Conway's Game of Life, and for whatever reason, the external super intelligence or whoever they are out there, right? If they didn't want you to know, they could stop the game, right? Like if you're playing your Nintendo, you can stop it, you can turn it off, you can reset it. Even if if you wanted to play with, if you really wanted to mess with the heads of the sentient beings, right? You could implant. Like you could use the word of God and go into somebody's ear and talk to them and say that you were God's voice, right? Just to mess with them, but don't tell anyone else, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have these religions, so you could create them, but if you didn't want anyone to have proof, you could just destroy all the evidence. You could erase the memories of everybody, like how you delete your save games, right? And so,
how can you be sure that anything that happened before you woke up this morning was real? Because that's just memories. I arrived at a conclusion that this body isn't 100% me, because I feel like I'm just sort of a pilot to a craft that's been engineered by someone else and programmed in a certain way, and I just have to handle sort of driving it. Because, for example, there are bodily functions that run independently of whether I think about it. Like I breathe automatically. I can control my breath, but if I don't think about it, it just goes by itself. The heartbeat even more so. And then there's things that happen against my will. For example, pain is generated because some chemicals are sent to the spot where the damage occurred to remind the body that something's wrong with it. But there's this thing called chronic pain, which the pain goes on even though something wrong, or there's just nothing wrong, and it just still goes on, and you don't have this switch in your body that you can just shut it off. You can do it with medication, but you can't will yourself not to feel pain. I don't know, maybe with meditation you can, but what if my consciousness is tied to this mechanism, and when I die, this body dissolves, my consciousness dissolves, but maybe not completely, and some level of it, lasts and just floats off into outer space, and I'm just this tiny bundle of electrons, still kind of sentient, but no longer human. And what if, for example, somehow it can then get attached to some other being forming and become the consciousness of that being?
Huh. Yeah. No, that sounds another good story. That one kind of sounds like well, not quite souls, but I guess it would be some kind of reincarnation.
Yeah, but I think it sounds exactly like souls and kind of like reincarnation.
With the topic of consciousness, I mean, it's the thing. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time. I used to think a lot about it. I read books like by a lot of AI and consciousness experts and such. I mean, again, I was going to go into the field. I was a computer science major, but I wanted to go into cognitive computing. And what's becoming interesting now is current events. We're at a point where we could potentially be building things. I mean, robotic technological things, which could potentially reach the point of consciousness. Maybe it's far off, but it's like we're getting close to the point where they're definitely getting almost as smart as us in many ways. As I already mentioned, there's examples of where they're surpassing human intelligence in certain fields, not in all fields, right? But in certain fields, and machines are. And so it used to be such that, we don't really care too much about consciousness because it's not going to affect the real world if we know what it is or not. But, well, I guess it does kind of matter in a sense for animal rights, right? Because you cannot experience, like one of the tenets in consciousness science is there's only one definite empirical piece of evidence there's only one consciousness you can know, and that's your own, right? Because you cannot enter someone else's body. Even another human being, you cannot go into their head and test. You can't put a thermometer in their head, a consciousness thermometer, and check their brain to see if it's conscious, right? All you can do is talk to them, and if they're answering and they talk like a human being, like they're awake, then they're probably conscious. If they're like lying down and they have no pulse, probably not. If they are asleep, probably maybe they're dreaming, but maybe not fully conscious. So, you look at a dog or you look at a cat and you assume that a certain level of consciousness because of similarities to the way, what they call it, the coefficients of consciousness, right? The brain activities, electrical activities in the brain or neurochemical activities in the brain that equate to certain states of consciousness. So pain looks similar in an MRI or in a scan in multiple brains, right? Or in different situations. Happiness looks one way, certain thoughts, when you say the word apple or, cheese or, etc. And that's part of cognitive science, is trying to be able to, measure brainwaves to see if we can actually read thoughts. That's another thing. But, I guess the point is that you can never really know the sentience or consciousness of another entity, which is, in the near future, that's the sentience test, right? That's a hypothetical machine that you could use to check. You could check on something's sentience or not, but yeah, I guess yeah. And then ultimately leads to the question, right? Is like, this is what I think. My thing that is, we're never gonna really know, but we're gonna be forced into the position of having to come up with some way to determine, kind of like in the sense that when you do tests, like you say you hated school, right? And testing, a lot of times, it's not necessarily testing how smart you are, right? You could be really smart, but you could still get bad grades because for some reason you got bored, or the school wasn't very interesting for you, and you're actually really smart, but you got bad grades, right? And or maybe you're smart, but you're I don't know, America, maybe you're African American, or you came from another culture, and your English is not that good. You're really smart, but you tested horribly because you're just missing one thing that the culture at large, or the established culture has over you, so they can filter you out of the big colleges, right? And so that's the kind of thing I feel like the way in which that creates divides, I guess, is, well, obviously in NIFU, the thing that creates divides with this kind of testing is also going to happen. Unfortunately, I feel it's going to happen with sentient, if we ever reach sentient machines. I don't know. Hopefully not, but
one thing I have to pitch in here is my thoughts on IQ tests, and that is that IQ tests measure your proficiency at solving IQ tests.
Yeah.
And nothing else, not your intelligence. Because, for example, one of the first IQ tests I had in high school, I think there was the whole class had it, took it, and one of the questions was to name we had four objects, and you had to name the odd one out. And I named one, named the odd one out, and name your reason for it. Name the reason for it. And I picked one that was different and presented my logic behind it. And the lady said, discussing the test, said, no, the answer is this and this. And it wasn't that I was wrong. It was just there was just one prescribed answer. And I read about intelligence that the one of the most important things about intelligence is elasticity of thinking. How was her thinking elastic?
Right,
Not
it
at
wasn't.
Yeah. So that's my gripe with IQ tests. And also there was this further development of the test called functional intelligence or something, and it measures your linguistic skills, your musical skills, and for some dumb reasons it scored me as musical genius, linguistic idiot.
Oh, was that when you took?
And that's actually I don't consider myself a linguistic genius by no means, but I think of myself as a kind of tone deaf. I greatly enjoy music, but I have no talent of for making music. And if you played a string of sounds, I would sometimes if they're really approximate similar sounds, I might not be able to for example differentiate if it's one higher note or if you played them at different speeds. It may seem to me like they're different notes. So there's that. The only thing that I think I might be better at in terms of recognizing sound is speech sounds, because in college I learned a lot about, for example, the production of speech sounds, and so if I hear something, I'm more likely to figure out how the sound is produced. Like, for example, I wouldn't know how to pronounce the th sounds, for example, if I weren't taught that you do this by putting your tongue between your teeth. And for example, German and French have these sounds you call umlauts, for example, U or E. And there's just, for example, U is pronounced like if you try to pronounce E, while your mouth being shaped into an U.
Oh,
Try it.
right, yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of mind bending, but when you actually try it, it's weird, but it works.
yeah. My wife. Well, in Canada, you have to learn French, so she was trying to teach me how to do that. I'm not quite good at it, but yeah.
Yeah, see, you pronounce it just right.
Oh, good. Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the language and yeah, but that is weird about the intelligence. I had to take a couple IQ tests, and I don't remember what I scored on it, but yeah, I always thought it was kind of bogus.
Yeah, I scored, I think, 110, I think. So that places me slightly above average, but nothing out of the ordinary. But I think a lot of the methodology of these tests was off. It was, for example, you had 45 seconds for each question, regardless of the difficulty. And one thing I think is important is the ability to manage your time. For example, maybe I would have scored higher if I had more time for the ones I found more difficult, and I could split that time more to my advantage. But these tests are very rigid and focused on very particular skills that don't sum up into everything that is intelligence.
Right. Yeah, and it's definitely like it's. I mean, like consciousness, intelligence is another. It's another very difficult to define, term. I mean, in the sense that it's like, I mean, if intelligence is defined by, I mean, I guess one definition is the ability to solve the necessary tasks for something, right? I mean, for example, in an IQ test, you're solving, we need you to find this object that's out, or we need you to, I don't know, put this thing, match this pattern, or we need you to do this or that, right? That's but it's like solving the problem is one thing, but even in another sense, like being able to identify what the problem is, that's the problem of philosophy and what we would call wisdom, right? Is not necessarily being able to solve solving individual problems is very important if you're engineering a system, right? Like you're building a computer, but being able to even imagine I think Einstein, he didn't do very well, right, in school.
Yeah.
Because imagination itself, right, the ability to imagine another problem that you did not even know was a problem, right? Nobody had even thought of relativity as a thing before he had thought of it, but that is not something that there is no test that could measure that ability, right? Because I don't know, maybe there is, but I feel definitely not the IQ test. But it's the thing. I mean, I'm very interested in intelligence, human intelligence, and I'm an educator, right? So, how human beings learn was important, right? I mean, because I was teaching them. Part of my job was, if I couldn't get these kids to, be able to perform, I was teaching high school kids who had basically. At one point, I was teaching high school kids who had dropped out and or otherwise got into bad groups. A lot of them were pregnant teen girls, and had to teach them to get them. They were at a second grade math or reading level, or really bad, right? I had to get them up to 9th grade, and then get them through like classes so that they could at least survive in a human civilization, right? Like shopping, how to vote, how to apply for a job, and maybe get one. And so basically, I was responsible for making I was responsible for creating human beings capable of at least not necessarily intelligence, but human beings with the necessary skills and I guess intelligence to survive in reality. So it is kind of my business.
So you basically shape them to perform well inside a certain system, because for example, let's say take a scenario like where the civilization ends, uh, all technology is gone, and you have to uh, get by in a completely different world. Or you can, for example, get lost, for example, in the jungle, and that alone, you can have a master's degree or a PhD in something and suck at life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't know how to, I don't know, set a fire, hunt and kill an animal, or what to watch out, like, not to eat some poisonous plant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so it's I mean, a lot of it was this, getting the ability to, well, in a certain way, like some skills they were learning were better than. Well, we definitely did not teach them anything. Like they, at the end of the class, they would get a high school diploma equivalent, but they definitely were not learning like algebra. They did not learn like, no high level physics or science or anything like that. It was just I would say the basics of surviving, not necessarily the actual wilderness, but the urban wilderness. I would say, like basically, how do, well, in a city setting, how to assimilate right into civilization such that you're not outright rejected. I mean, the biggest thing I found was the biggest roadblock to them was dealing with other human beings. That's, I mean, to me, that's especially nowadays, that's the thing, at least in current civilization. Now if there's apocalypse, then maybe not, but one thing was when it was practice job interview day, right, they'd all come in smelling like, they were like smelling like marijuana. Well, here you can't do that in a job interview, at least when I was teaching. They would come in, with like, showing all their midriff and like looking like they're going to the club, not giving eye contact, not shaking hands, just like not caring about the job. And that was the biggest, that was like the biggest thing for them. I mean, now if you're in the wilderness, that doesn't matter, but in the city, it almost doesn't matter. Like what, it's all about, where I was, it was all about, how you can present yourself and how you can communicate your seriousness or communicate your, I don't know, your ability. Well, most of the jobs there were, service type jobs. So, if you were not a personable person, it would be very hard for you. And so, but yeah, it would be interesting to see, like, I mean, I don't know, I guess in the country, I'm sure maybe if you're in a rural area, right, the skills they're going to teach you are going to be more about dealing with the natural world, learning, how to, find or get food or make fires, etc. But yeah, it's who's smarter? I mean, I don't know who's actually more intelligent or who's better prepared.
There are just so many different kinds of intelligence. Like, I know languages, but I have very limited technical knowledge, for example, about engines or fixing house appliances. So I might have this IQ of 110, but in certain ways I'm blithering idiot, basically, because when some technical person comes in, for example, my dad is a very technical person, and he's the first one to go to for advice, or he may even come around to fix something, and I just can stand around and maybe hand him a tool. But these situations make me realize that there's no one intelligence, and there will be situations and that a educated person will feel infinitely dumb.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not good at cars either, for sure.
And maybe both me and my dad, if we were lost in the jungle, we'd have a hard time surviving. For example, maybe we could, for example, hunt and kill something. I think because one thing that he managed to teach me is to keep fit. So, I exercise, and also I really admire my grandpa. He was like lived up to the age of 83, and all this time he exercises every morning, like squats, bending, stretching. So I do have some physical education, some physical culture ingrained. But for example, there's so many things like you have to be extremely careful with water, because when you drink tap water, you assume it's clear and free of any bacteria or toxic agents, and you can't know that in the wilderness. And you take a sip and you can be sick or just die.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So there's just, all kinds of knowledge. And on the other end of the spectrum, continuing about what we said about artificial intelligence, there's this thing that's also trending right now called digital immortality. Like transferring your consciousness into a computer or maybe a robotic body. I think it was Ray Kurzweil, who says he wants to be the first one to have his consciousness transplanted into a machine, and I'm highly skeptical about it, because as I said about consciousness, it seems to be so closely tied to the mechanism that our physical body is, that I'm not sure how our mind would handle being transported into something that doesn't have muscles, doesn't have hormones, doesn't need to breathe, to eat. Would be basically, upon being transplanted, go crazy, basically.
All right, everybody. So thanks for tuning in to the Silver Spook podcast. I'm Silver Spook of Silver Spook Games / Christian Miller. You can find my stuff at just Google Silver Spook Games. Neophyte is the game that I have out. It's going to be coming out on Steam at some point. It's already out on itch.io. Buy it now, and you get a free Steam key when it comes out. Dysmaton is the game I'm currently working on. Dysmaton. And you can play a demo of that from also itch.io.
So I'm Fitz, and you can find my games either through the Adventure Game Studio forums, or you can Google the one that's most Googleable, and this one's called The Unprintable Magenta. Or you can try Monty the Komodo Dragon. Or you can try my online comics, which are now defunct and have been for a long time, but they're still there. They're on the Duck webcomics, and they are called A Bit Cheesy. And then there was my other comic Chomp. And I also go as Fitz on the Duck webcomics.
Thanks everybody for listening in or possibly watching the still image for long periods of time. I hate doing this part because I can't think of a good way to sign off. Bye. All right. You can say goodbye. Say goodbye in Polish.
Cześć. Cześć i czołem. Siemka.